Hello and welcome to Mind, Body, Sleep, the podcast for anyone out there who wants to understand and recover from insomnia using a holistic perspective. I'm Beth Kendall, your host. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to be back with you. For anyone just tuning in, my name is Beth Kendall. I'm a holistic sleep coach, and I help people get free from insomnia and trust their own ability to sleep again. Today, we're going to talk about changing sleep patterns during the recovery process and why it's completely normal if this happens. For example, a primary pattern of sleep onset insomnia, meaning having a hard time falling asleep, might suddenly switch over to sleep maintenance insomnia, which is waking up during the night, or vice versa. And just because I'm talking about this common phenomenon doesn't mean it will necessarily be a part of your experience. I just want to share a perspective with you that will hopefully give you a better understanding of what's behind it and why it's all just a normal part of the process. But first, I wanted to talk about this Michael Jackson rabbit hole I went down last week. And don't even ask me how it started, but I stumbled on this Thriller documentary from 2023. And it's all about that album and the creative process behind it, which I thought was really fascinating. But I was struck by this documentary for a few reasons. First, it took me way back to all the amazing songs on that album, which was such an exciting time in my own life and in the music world. This was when MTV and music videos started to emerge as a medium. And if any of you saw that Billie Jean performance at the Grammys, you know it was just electrifying. Probably not unlike Elvis Presley when he performed Hound Dog. But I can still remember the feeling when I was watching him doing the moonwalk. I think I must have been 15 or 16 at the time. But another thing I found so interesting about the documentary was the insight from Misty Copeland. She was one of the guest artists on the documentary, and she's a wonderful prima ballerina who still dances with the American Ballet Theater, I believe. And I have a strong ballet background, having danced with a couple of professional companies. So her perspective on Michael Jackson's style from a ballet standpoint and how he was able to create so many iconic moves that we still see all the time, I also thought was so fascinating. But what struck me the most was how much he must have suffered with insomnia to the point that he did, taking such a potent anesthetic to be able to sleep. It just seems like such a needless tragedy and a terribly difficult way to live. And I remember hearing about this when I was in the thick of it myself and thinking, yeah, I totally get why you would need so much medication to zonk out. I mean, everyone around me was questioning, how could this be? And I was like, I get it. I get it. I understand. And none of this about insomnia was in the documentary, but it's really unfortunate because he probably hadn't heard anything along the lines of the perspective I share on this podcast. I mean, I sure hadn't heard anything like it at the time, and I was doing everything I possibly could, but not understanding why your brain is doing what it's doing can certainly ramp up hyperarousal because, you're wondering the whole time, what the heck is wrong with me? So it did make me realize and appreciate how far we've come in terms of understanding and helping people get beyond insomnia. So let's dive into the topic of changing sleep patterns and what's going on with this, because I know from personal experience that it can kind of throw you if this happens. I had roughly the same insomnia pattern for over 40 years. And then it changed and I was like, what on earth is going on? So let's explore this a little bit. Often, one of my students with, say, sleep maintenance insomnia will tell me something like, Beth, my sleep has gotten so much better and I'm able to sleep through the night. But now, for some reason, the last 4 nights, I've had a hard time falling asleep. So why would that be? Or maybe someone who typically has a hard time falling asleep starts falling asleep much easier, but then suddenly they're waking up in the middle of the night. And this was how it went for me. I'd always had sleep onset insomnia, but then when I started falling asleep just fine, wouldn't you know, that's when I started waking up a few hours before my alarm. And this can be really perplexing, especially if it's something brand new that's never been a part of your pattern before. But it's actually so common for hyperarousal to shapeshift in new and interesting ways once you're on the recovery path, all with the intention of keeping you safe and aware of the perceived threat of not sleeping. And of course, the natural tendency when this happens is to want to figure it out, right? Our brains want to know what's going on, especially if there's been some decent sleep and that's on the line, because when you're in it, you really feel like you can lose that or you've got to protect that. I remember that feeling oh so well. So when the sleep pattern changes, it's like, oh, now I've got this new problem to contend with, but that's really not the case. And again, I think it's always helpful to understand where this is coming from. And of course, it's always coming from a place of safety and survival. It's almost like the brain starts to notice you're more indifferent to the original pattern. Maybe you're not as worried about it. You start seeing some changes in your life and in your sleep. You have more hope. So you're starting to take your focus off of sleep and engage more with life, which of course is right about when hyperarousal decides to get creative and come through the side door. I always say it's fear showing up in a new pair of shoes because it really wants to get your attention in a new way and let you know that, hey, I am really not too sure that it's safe for you to engage with life and take your attention off of sleep because there's this looming threat of not sleeping. So I'm just going to change form completely and send you some signals that way. Aren't our brains amazing? So it's fear showing up in a new pair of shoes, just hoping you won't notice the disguise. So how can we work with this situation? You'll often hear me say it's not the pattern itself as much as it is the significance or meaning we assign to the pattern that shapes how we experience it. So just knowing that these patterns come from a protective place can help shape your perspective on why it's happening. It's a sign of a very loving and powerful brain that is looking out for you. And the more we can allow the pattern to be there, the more we open the door for it to go. We're simply unraveling the ball of yarn that is insomnia. Our more automatic response might be to put a lot of attention on the new pattern and keep an eye on it, right? We might want to stay hypervigilant about what's going on. Maybe we start going down the road of trying to change the pattern or fix it somehow, much like we initially did with our sleep. But this is actually how the new pattern can become a bit sticky because the brain notices where we put our attention. So that can reinforce the new pattern, which is built on a perception of threat and keep it in place. Versus normalizing that this can happen, nothing has gone wrong, we're not trying to break the pattern or make it go away. In fact, it's a great opportunity to teach the limbic system that it doesn't need to keep showing up in new and interesting ways. We're not trying to change the pattern, we're changing our reaction to the pattern, which is ultimately what changes the pattern in the long run. After a while, hyperarousal gets bored with the whole situation. It runs out of new shoes to wear, and it doesn't feel the need to send you these danger signals anymore. So if insomnia decides to do some shape-shifting as you move through your recovery, just know that this is a completely normal part of the process and likely means you're on the exact right track. Thanks so much for joining me today. Please do take a moment to hit those 5 stars on your favorite platform. I'm Beth Kendall, and you've been listening to the Mind, Body, Sleep podcast. See you next time. Thanks for being here today. If you love what you heard on today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the podcast. And if you need more support with your sleep, join me in the Mind, Body, Sleep Mentorship. This 3-month one-on-one program will transform your relationship with sleep so you can get back to living the life that you love, free from the fear of not sleeping. Head on over to bethkendall.com for more details. I'll see you next time.